News with Frank Reynolds.
Good evening. The Supreme Court of the United States began a new term today with both Chief Justice Earl Warren and Associate Justice Abe Fortas in their accustomed places. The court ruled today on the 1966 law on reservists. It upheld by 8-1 President Johnson's authority to mobilize certain reservists, and this decision frees the Army to send some 250 soldiers to Vietnam. Justice Douglas, who dissented from today's order, had temporarily blocked the Army from sending the soldiers to Vietnam. Perhaps ironically, the first case considered by the court today dealt with the political hopes of George Wallace, one of the principal critics of the Warren Court. ABC's Irv Chapman reports from Washington.
The 1968 term of this court is now convened. With these simple words, the Chief Justice of the United States, Earl Warren, again got the Supreme Court down to business. It was almost as though nothing had happened during the recess, as though the Supreme Court had not become a political football, as though Chief Justice Warren had not expected he might now have begun his sought-after retirement. Today, the courtroom resounded almost immediately to legal argument, an argument that probably put the Chief Justice in mind of the aphorism about defending to the death the rights of a man with whom one violently disagrees. The case involved presidential candidate George Wallace, seeking a place on the ballot in Ohio. He's already on in the other 49 states. Ohio's law is purposely designed to make the going rough for third parties. Unconstitutionally rough, Wallace's lawyer argued, the scene sketched by ABC staff artist Charles Kavanaugh. But as the next weeks go by, the court will again be deeply involved in controversy should high school students have the right to a silent anti-war protest by wearing black armbands in school. Is a law against burning the American flag constitutional? Do the police have the right to stop a demonstration because the bystanders might get violent? There will be additional cases to define the concept of one man, one vote, and the rights of defendants in police custody, and a challenge to the federal laws against marijuana. The 9 men in this courthouse are supposed to be above the political battle, but this year that is harder than ever. They know the temper of the nation. Congress brought it very close to home during the Fortas controversy, and the justices cannot make their own speeches in rebuttal. To say, for example, that the only way they have to augment the rights of a defendant is to set him free if he's been denied his rights, so that even if the critics of the Supreme Court grew to a majority, that would underscore all the more the court's role as the protector of the minority. And today's minority was George Wallace's American Independent Party. This is Irv Chapman, ABC News at the Supreme Court. Now for a comment on the court's future, here is Howard K. Smith.
President Johnson is worried enough about Vice President Humphrey's fortunes to announce today that he would make a campaign speech for him. However, ABC News learns that the president is almost as worried about that Supreme Court that opened its session here today. Big changes on the court seem inevitable before long. Chief Justice Earl Warren, having publicly declared a wish to leave, may now have to because some of his moral power is bound to have been lost by that announcement. Associate Justice John M. Harlan has poor eyesight and now has to have all documents read aloud to him, which casts doubt on his future. Justice William O. Douglas, 70, has a heart problem, though otherwise in good health, he too is on the doubtful list. And Justice Hugo Black is 82, and despite remarkable durability, could feel the call to retirement before very long. Since many court rulings have lately been bare 5-4 decisions, changes by a new president could, the administration fears, due to Johnson legislation, what the court in 1937 did to Franklin D. Roosevelt's. The administration is said to be especially concerned about rulings by a hostile court on its aid to education legislation and the Voting Rights Act, both of which have been accused by enemies of grazing the Constitution. So one more Johnson attempt to appoint at least a new Chief Justice is under consideration, and the contest on the hustings may not be the only one for the nation's future. Another may be at hand over what is usually the quietest branch of the government. This is Howard K. Smith in Washington.
ABC White House correspondent Bill Gill reports that President Johnson has several names under consideration to succeed Chief Justice Warren, but wants advance assurance from the Senate, informal advance assurance, that any nomination he submits will be approved. Among the names most frequently mentioned, Senator Philip Hart of Michigan, who led the unsuccessful fight for Abe Fortas, Senator John Sherman Cooper of Kentucky, a Republican, and Senator Thomas Kuechel of California, also a Republican, but who will leave office in January. In a moment, the report on Vietnam.
It's dawn, and the battle is just about to begin. It's the battle every eye must fight every day of its life. It's the fight against eye pollution. Soot, ashes, dust, dirt, exhaust. They're in the air, and they get in your eye. Nature gave your eye the ability to clean itself. But this big load of impurities, this eye pollution, is too much for it to handle. It gets tired, irritated, uncomfortable, red. How do you win the battle against eye pollution? Use Murine. Murine cleans, soothes, comforts the eye. And unlike some things you put in your eye, you can use Murine every day, as often as you want to. Murine. It's the pure and simple solution to eye pollution.
This is a molecular model of poly-1,4-cyclohexylene dimethylene terephthalate. How about that? And I'm Joanna Barnes here to tell you what this unique molecule of Codel polyester fiber means in carpets. It's so special, it's patented. Every room in your house comes alive because carpets of Codel bounce back beautifully. Even a house full of kids can't keep Codel fiber down. That's why Codel is the fastest growing carpet fiber. If you can't remember the name Codel, ask for poly-1,4-cyclohexylene dimethylene terephthalate.
We also make 2,2,4-trimethyl-1,3-pentane diol monoisobutyrate.
But that doesn't go in carpets.
Codel fiber has bounced back. Built-in.
Count on Codel, a member of the Eastman Kodak family.
The 9-day siege of Tuong Duc was lifted today as South Vietnamese troops moved out from the camp and seized 5 nearby villages. Not a shot was fired in the recapture of the villages, and there was no trace of the estimated 8,000 North Vietnamese that had surrounded Tuong Duc. In the north, American Marines have returned to Khe Sanh, the fort they abandoned in July following a siege of some 77 days. There was no sign of the enemy. Khe Sanh will be occupied temporarily while the Marines search out enemy soldiers believed in the area. The Saigon government has adapted an ancient tradition to bring the story of the war and the government's aims to remote villages. Teams of wandering troubadours travel from hamlet to hamlet with the message. ABC's George Allen reports from Ben Hai.
The girls teaching a patriotic song to these children are members of a cultural drama team. In a country with the primitive communications of Vietnam, these teams are an important means of basic face-to-face communication with the people in remote villages. Often the cultural drama team provides the only entertainment a remote village will see all year. Groups of wandering troubadours are traditional in Vietnam. They date back at least to the 18th century. In contemporary Vietnam, the government of North Vietnam, the Viet Cong, and the Saigon government all use the teams to disseminate political ideas. The U.S. picked up the idea, and this team is paid for by the U.S. Information Agency. The team consists of 4 men and 3 girls. It's kept small so that it can travel easily with whatever transport may be available in remote areas. Team members always wear the traditional black pajamas of the Vietnamese peasant. Their message is definitely soft sell. It's usually contained within the entertainment. This girl, for instance, is singing about the hard, lonely life of the Viet Cong soldier. As he hides in the jungle far from home, she sings, he thinks of his village and family and friends, and he's very sad. The Viet Cong soldier would be much happier if he came over to the government side. The team performs during the day for children and at night for adults. Most popular performer at the children's shows is the magician. In Vietnam, the magician traditionally does not speak. He goes through his routines in pantomime. U.S. officials measure the effectiveness of the teams by their popularity with the Vietnamese.
Nearly every province chief in the country has asked that a team be assigned permanently to his province. Their unpopularity with the Viet Cong is another indicator of their effectiveness. VC attacks on the teams have stepped up recently. Another measure of their popularity is that this patriotic song, which was written for the cultural drama teams, is now the best-known song throughout South Vietnam. George Allen, ABC News in Ben Hai Village.
In New York today, Secretary of State Rusk warned that the North Vietnamese are preparing a third major offensive against the South. However, the Secretary of State said that the Allies are ready for any such offensive should it come. And in Saigon, President Tu said the enemy has lost the war militarily and is now shifting to a political offensive. ABC guest commentator David Schoenbrunn tonight takes another look at the Paris peace talks.
Once again, the Paris peace talks are the subject of national controversy and confusion. Insiders report that leading American delegates have recommended to Washington that we stop the bombing. Hanoi says it will not advance the talks in Paris until we do. However, Dean Rusk on ABC's Issues and Answers denied that his delegates had made any such recommendation, and he further insisted that Hanoi hasn't told anyone what it would do in return if we did stop bombing. The public, as usual, doesn't know what to believe. It might be useful, therefore, at this time to set the record straight on the one essential fact that no one can deny, and it is this. From the very start, Hanoi has said it will not discuss any kind of a settlement in the South until we stop bombing the North. That's the only item on the agenda in Paris. There are, in fact, no peace talks in Paris. All that's being discussed is a preliminary step to peace talks. This has been the only question ever since March 31st, when it was thought that President Johnson, by removing himself from the election and proposing negotiations with Hanoi, was casting his party in the role of the peace seeker, thus assuring an election victory. But it hasn't worked out that way. The long months of deadlock in Paris have led to ever more dissent, and it's boomeranged in favor of Mr. Nixon. Nixon has successfully avoided the main issue of the election by refusing to talk about Vietnam, on the grounds that it would disturb chances for peace in Paris. If that were ever a consideration, it has now become nonsense. Since Paris is not talking about a peace settlement, Nixon cannot possibly disturb what is not happening. By remaining silent, Mr. Nixon neither helps the Paris talks nor the clarity of the election campaign. If Nixon really has a plan to shorten the war or end it as he promises, then now would be a good, patriotic time to reveal it. This is David Schoenbrunn for ABC News.
Well, Richard Nixon today did spell out some of his views on the bombing of North Vietnam. That report coming up.
Who is it?
May I talk to you a second, ma'am?
Speak.
I am making, ma'am, a cigarette survey.
And I'm making a chocolate cake.
No, but
Yes?
I'd like you to try a cool cigarette,
Oh,
ma'am.
I really don't have the time.
No, please go on. Just light up one.
Oh, all right. Okay, I tried it. Bye.
Just a moment, ma'am. Tell me how it compares to your regular brand, please.
Tastes cooler. Very nice.
You like it?
Yes, fine, really.
Ma'am, did you notice that Cool's now come in a new long size?
It is longer, isn't it? Thanks a million.
You like the taste of Cool filter longs, and you seem to go for the new long size. Now, tell me, ma'am, would you actually, buy a pack?
Yes, I like everything about it.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye, ma'am.
Oh, yoo-hoo. By the way, before you go, could you leave me the rest of that pack?
Cool Filter Longs, the only long-size cigarette with a taste of extra coolness.
Richard Nixon addressed the United Press International Editors and Publishers Conference in Washington today. Consistently during the campaign, Mr. Nixon has refused to explain what he would do about a bombing halt because, as he says, that is a trump card at the Paris talks. But in response to a question today, Nixon went further to give his views on the bombing.
I believe that any air power should be, and I've always said, used against only military targets. That has been my view. At the present time, as you know, 90% of the bombing has been discontinued. The 10% that is now being continued is for tactical military purposes to protect the forces in the DMZ zone. I would not raise that level of bombing. I believe that is, however, the trump card in the negotiations, and I would not give up that trump card unless we were to, in return, get from the North Vietnamese some kind of evidence, some move on their part, that they would de-escalate their assaults on American men. When we talk, for example, about bombing, sometimes we say, you get the argument, stop the bombing. Our interest is in stopping the war, and if by stopping the bombing it contributes to stopping the war, that is one thing. If by stopping the bombing it simply raises the number of Americans who will be killed, that's something else again. My view is we should stop the bombing when whoever is president is convinced it will result in less American lives lost rather than more American lives lost. That's the key point.
George Wallace also spoke to the Conference of United Press International Editors and Publishers, and he gave a second speech to the National Press Club. Wallace told the UPI editors that he is against the use of nuclear weapons in Vietnam, but favors a military victory if the Paris talks fail. The mood was lighter, much lighter, during the question and answer session at the Press Club.
Governor, if the Chief Justice vacancy on the Supreme Court still exists next January 20 and you are president, who would you appoint to fill this vacancy? And someone else asks, is it true you will name Lester Maddox?
Well, let me say this, that Lester Maddox would make a darn sight better than what we got, I can tell you that. But I know that's one of those questions, good, funny question, but of course he's not a lawyer. But maybe that's the trouble. We got, I don't know. Whoever is appointed won't be climbing in the mountains in China. I don't but of course, Mr. Maddox hasn't mentioned his desire to serve on the court. But he'd write some different decisions, I tell you that. It wouldn't be like...
Finally, Governor, we have a sign-off question here from someone apparently not a member of the press club, but he says, I am a briefcase-carrying, guideline-writing government worker. When should I start looking for a new job?
The day after I throw your briefcase in the Potomac River. But I say that, and Jim, we're not talking about all you folks. We're going to keep some of you, those that vote right.
Campaigning in Raleigh, North Carolina today, Spiro Agnew urged his listeners not to waste their votes, as he put it, on George Wallace. Agnew said that a vote for Wallace would be a vote taken away from Richard Nixon and consequently a vote for Hubert Humphrey. Coming up next, today's report on the Democrats.
You're suddenly shapelier. You're suddenly shapelier. You're suddenly shapelier in a Playtex Cross Your Heart bra. Its secret? This Playtex shaping crosses your heart with stretch to lift and separate. You're suddenly shapelier in a Playtex Cross Your Heart bra. You'll see. Get one and pass the word. You're suddenly shapelier. You're suddenly shapelier.
Announcing a comfortable way to look 5 pounds thinner. The new 5 pounds thinner girdle by Playtex. Prove it yourself. Fingertips so. Press in. See? The new Playtex girdle has fingertip panels to hold you in firmly. Yet it's so different. Feels like nothing you've ever felt before. Look 5 pounds thinner without losing a pound.
Also from Playtex, Golden Girdles, now on sale. Save $2.
The White House announced today, as Howard Smith announced earlier, that President Johnson will make his first speech in behalf of the Humphrey Muskie ticket on Thursday night on nationwide radio. The International Ladies Garment Workers Union will pay for the broadcast. Mr. Johnson has, of course, endorsed Mr. Humphrey in the past, but has not made any outright campaign speeches, as he will this Thursday night. The Vice President, campaigning today in Pennsylvania, attacked both George Wallace and Richard Nixon. Humphrey charged that Wallace appeals only to the fears of people and cannot be trusted. And Mr. Humphrey said Nixon refuses to speak out on the issues, says one thing in the North and another in the South, and can't be trusted. Senator Muskie campaigned at the University of Syracuse today. He was taunted by hecklers who finally quieted down when a group of university football players moved in. Throughout Muskie's campaign, he has been heckled repeatedly and has often turned it to his own advantage, especially with youth. ABC's Dave Snell reports on the Muskie campaign and the senator's growing appeal to the young.
My plea is, don't opt out. Get involved. Choose your candidate, whatever that choice is. Get involved only in that way. Can we reform the structure? To do it must do. You know,
5 weeks ago, few of these students would probably have been able to identify Edmund S. Muskie. Since that time, through almost daily college appearances, Muskie is fast becoming the Pied Piper of the disenchanted young, the former supporters of Bobby Kennedy and Eugene McCarthy. Alone among the candidates, Edmund Muskie could conceivably keep them from opting out.
Stop the war! Stop the war!
Muskie's transformation got its start 2 weeks ago when he was heckled by students in Washington, Pennsylvania. Instead of shouting them down, Humphrey style, Senator Muskie made a bargain.
I'll suggest something right now with you young gentlemen. You pick out one of your number to come right up here now, and I'll give him 10 minutes of uninterrupted attention. If you give me your uninterrupted attention.
We're here to make our voice heard.
While student Rick Brody was being heard, Senator Edmund Muskie was becoming, if not a campus hero of the McCarthy mold, at least a politician who really listens. For the students, perhaps the only one left.
Have I talked around any question that's been put to me? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, let's get back to Chicago then. I'm sorry. And I'll speak very frankly about Chicago. Well, I'll get to that next. I mean, there are some candidates who can talk out of both sides of their mouths at once.
The students do not always agree with the senator's answers on Vietnam or Chicago, but most of them are listening. And Ed Muskie, an unknown 5 weeks ago, is building respect which may just grow into a constituency of the young by 1972.
Go where your hearts and your minds and your convictions tell you to go, whether or not it agrees with me. But don't stop. Keep going. And if you do, I have no fear for the future of our country. Thank you very much.
What's the least you can spend for color television and still get an excellent set? Let's start with a heavy-duty chassis. Add the circuitry, connectors, tubes, and solid-state devices. The IF stages, 2 are good, 3 are better. Next, the VHF-UHF tuner assembly and control. A 24,000-volt power source. Automatic gain control, color monitor, automatic color control, noise filter. A big 117 square inch picture tube. A good-looking cabinet. And you end up with the Emerson 279.95 color television. Spend any less and you'd be better off with black and white. Of course, if you want bigger screens, fancier cabinets, or consoles, well, Emerson makes 18 others. Emerson. You can pay a lot more and end up with a lot less.
On the New York Stock Exchange today, Dow Jones Industrials were up more than 3.5 points. More than 12 million shares were traded. The New York Stock Exchange index was unchanged. On the American Stock Exchange, more than 6 million shares were traded. The American Exchange Index was down 5 cents. Well, they were tigers of a different stripe today as Detroit bounced back to defeat the Cardinals and return the World Series to St. Louis for the 6th game. ABC's Dave Dials reports from Detroit.
A gritty chips-down performance by Mickey Lolich has kept alive Detroit's flickering championship flame. He told me the Tigers now are a new team.
After winning today and coming from behind like we did, being 3 runs down in the first inning, I think that the guys think they can really do it now.
Lolich did not stop Lou Brock. No one has. He's hitting over 500. This man who has terrorized the Tigers with blazing bat and blinding speed quickly had him on the ropes. A screaming double leading off the game, and a packed house at Tiger Stadium sat in stunned silence. It looked too much like a replay of games 3 and 4. Brock hitting safely for the 8th time in his last 11 trips. Curt Flood scored him with a single, and it's 1-0 Cardinals. And they weren't through. Orlando Cepeda, a GOAT in previous World Series, struck his 2nd home run. And this was no cheap shot into some friendly seats. The game isn't 5 minutes old, and already the modern-day Gas House gang has jumped in front 3-0. But Nelson Briles was not at his best today, and the confident Cardinals stumbled. The Tigers, who came from behind 40 times during the regular season, revived for one chilly afternoon anyway, those late-inning heart-stoppers. In the 4th, Mickey Stanley leads off with a wrong field triple, his first hit in a dozen at-bats. With 1 out, Stanley scores on a fly ball. Then another triple, this time by Willie Horton. And the chant is "Go, Tigers, go." Jim Northrup delivers a 2-out single, and Horton scores, and now it's 3-2. And now the people believe all over again. Tiger Stadium is alive, and so are the Tigers. Lolich was permitted to hit for himself in the 7th, and hit he did. A single to right with 1 out. Dick McAuliffe singles and Stanley walks. Bases loaded. 1 out. And Al Kaline coming to the plate. The Tigers' elder statesman does the job he must do. A single to center. Lolich and McAuliffe score. Tigers lead 4-3. That would have been enough, but the Tigers got an insurance run. Norm Cash singles to right. Stanley comes in to score. It's Detroit 5, St. Louis 3. And the Tigers are still alive. Dave Dials, ABC News, Detroit.
That's tonight's news and comment. I'm Frank Reynolds. Good night.